just to give me roses. I wish she could again, but that was on the outside, and things were different then. We built our world together.
Good evening and welcome to our We Want to Break Free live stream. But before I break out into a rendition of I Want to Break Free, I'd like to say in the spirit of reconciliation, the Astronomical Society of Victoria acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to the land, sea and community. And we pay our respects to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people today. Tonight, the Astronomical Society is proud to bring you our We Want to Break Free live stream. Some of us are nearly out of lockdown, some of us are still in lockdown, and some of us today went into lockdown. So we thought we would share with you or continue the journey of sharing the night sky with you, as most of us still sit home, wondering when we'll be able to break free from lockdown and restrictions. So grab a drink, get cozy, sit back as we bring you a selection of objects within the Milky Way. And we'll jump straight into it to Messier 13, which is a globular cluster. And I will bring the team in for tonight as we have a look at Messier 13 with our lovely expert commentators, Steve and Stefan. And before we start, Hayden, no lockdown for us, but we're not allowed to visit anyone at anyone's houses. And the clouds have spoiled it for Melbourne, but we're lucky because Caleb went into lockdown in Brisbane today. And he's got clear skies, so we're using his equipment tonight. So thank you for that, Caleb.
No worries at all.
Now, Stefan, I think you might have had some things to say about Messier 13.
Yeah, so as you can see on the screen, Messier 13 is a really beautiful example of a globular cluster, one of these large agglomerations of hundreds of thousands of stars. And this particular one, M13, also known as the Hercules cluster, is one of the most famous globular clusters of the Northern Hemisphere sky. So we're quite lucky down here in the Southern Hemisphere. We get to see the glorious Omega Centauri, the largest or apparently largest globular cluster. But up in the Northern Hemisphere, people from the Americas and Europe, to them, this is their most breathtaking globular cluster, M13. So this particular globular cluster is around 22,000 light years away, and it's just about barely visible to the naked eye at magnitude 5.8. It's a beautiful object to look at through binoculars, but it's particularly wonderful when you take a look at it through a telescope. And moving up in aperture to about 8-inch telescopes, you'll start to be able to resolve some of the stars within the core. So as you can see, it's not one of the largest globular clusters in the night sky, but it is still fairly decent in size at around 60% the size of the full moon. So it's around 145 light years in diameter, the entire globular cluster, and it formed around 11.5 billion years ago. So relatively recent after the start of the universe. At least on our time scale. So M13, it's a relatively high density globular cluster. You can really see towards the core it really ramps up in density, and it contains several 100,000 stars. In the middle of the core of the Hercules cluster, it's around 100 times as dense in terms of stellar density as our sun and surrounding region. And one particularly interesting fact about this cluster is that in the year 1974, scientists actually decided to send a radio signal towards this globular cluster. And to do that, they used the Arecibo radar telescope in Puerto Rico. You may be familiar with this giant 305-meter dish. If you've ever watched James Bond, there was an old James Bond, I think, don't quote me on this, I think it was the Pierce Brosnan era James Bond. I may be wrong with that, but there's one of the James Bond movies where James Bond is fighting the evil villain on top of the Arecibo radio dish. But anyway, so scientists were able to utilize this 300-meter diameter dish to beam a message towards this globular cluster. And encoded in the radio waves that they beamed was information about humans, the human species, our DNA, some information about atomic numbers, and some of the information about the position of Earth in our local galaxy, in the hopes that if there is an alien civilization in that region, they would be able to detect that and possibly talk back to us. However, now we know that it's relatively unlikely that an alien civilization would be able to form within a globular cluster, just because these globular clusters are really dynamic, chaotic systems all buzzing around. Because of all of these stellar interactions going on, it's relatively unlikely that a planet would be able to form around a star in this globular cluster and would be able to stay stable long enough to develop intelligent life. Another little piece of information is that this was actually one of the first globular clusters ever detected. It was studied in the early 19th century by a famous astronomer named William Herschel. And he actually suggested that this may be an example of gravity operating elsewhere in space. Of course, in that time period, we didn't really know that gravity was this universal force that existed elsewhere in the universe. But yeah, William Herschel was able to make the deduction that this globular cluster must be sort of held together under its own gravity. And also, if you take a look in the top right corner of the image on the screen at the moment, you'll see a fuzzy sort of little blob towards the right-hand top corner. That's actually a galaxy far, far off in the distance. And that's catalogued as NGC 6207. It's a spiral galaxy, just like our own Milky Way, but sort of seen edge on. So as our controller moves up towards it, yeah, there you go. So a really beautiful example of a spiral galaxy. Again, far, far off in the distance. I said that the Hercules cluster is around 22,000 light years away from us, which is very, very far. Well, this galaxy is 30 million light years away. So absolutely far off in the distance.
Now we have a question from Oliver. From Oliver Hill. Do globular clusters rotate, and what determines their direction of rotation if they do?
Yeah, so that's a good question. My instinctive answer is that yes, just as a matter of fact that most objects bound through gravity in the universe do have at least one sort of major axis upon which they rotate. This is a consequence of the conservation of angular momentum, a fundamental law of physics in the universe. And this conservation of angular momentum, this sort of fact that they all sort of share one global rotation, is what actually leads to objects in the universe collapsing down into a sort of planar disk, just like our solar system orbits in one sort of flat plane and the galaxy is one sort of flat plane. globular clusters, I'm sure, also share one major axis of rotation. But just given the sort of complexity of globular clusters, it seems like the sort of local interactions between them result in them having, just a chaotic sort of mess. But my suspicion, and I'm not 100% sure if this is correct, my suspicion is that given enough time, they will sort of collapse down into a more disk-like structure.
There we go. Now,
I won't disagree with that, Stefan. I think that's a good gut feel. That's an interesting. Well, it's not really a fact, but an interesting thing about that radio message that was sent off to this globular cluster. It's going to take off at the speed of light that the radio message goes at. It's going to take it. How far away did you say it was? 24,000 light years?
22,000 light years. Yeah.
So it's going to take 22,000 years to get there, which is a fair old time in sort of people time, I suppose. But apparently, when it arrives, M13 won't actually be there anymore. It will have moved. So, oh dear. But apparently it was really more of a sort of a technology demonstration rather than a let's send something to those nice people out there. Interesting thing is as well, you mentioned about that it's probably unlikely that there's any planets because the stars are so close. If there was a planet and there was some sort of intelligent life form on there, and they looked up from their nice planet up into the sky, they would see literally thousands of stars in the sky that were of the brightness of Sirius and Canopus, the brightest stars in our sky. But the sky would be absolutely full of stars with a sort of a minus magnitude because things are so much closer there. It's really good tonight because obviously with Caleb told us earlier on today that he has about an additional 10 degrees of view sort of over the horizon, if you like, compared with us poor folks down here in Melbourne, being quite a bit further south. So we're getting to see the objects that we'll be looking at are really right down at the horizon for those of us who are based in Melbourne. They're a little bit higher for Caleb, so it's a great opportunity for us to see some of these objects through his system. It should be good tonight. I'm looking forward to looking at these objects.
And just if I may make one more point about the Arecibo message, to anyone who's watching this stream on your phone or computer, I encourage you, open Google and search the Arecibo message, and even have a look at the Google images that come up. You'll see a visual representation of the information that was sent. And look, I think the aliens might struggle to figure out what it means, because I think even myself looking at it right now, the only thing I can really even decipher is the picture of a person. But yeah, take a look at it and Yeah. So, I mean, there's a lot of information about it. So you can read about what all of the different symbols represent and what they mean and how they may be deciphered. It's a very, very interesting story.
It's interesting that this the Great Hercules Cluster, M13, that we're looking at, is for people in the northern hemisphere is considered to be the most spectacular globular cluster. They do, of course. It's not. It's a very bright one, but it's interesting because M22, which is the very big globular cluster that sits just on the tip of the lid of the teapot in Sagittarius, is also a very big and bright globular cluster. Maybe the reason why people in the Northern Hemisphere don't think that that's as spectacular is because for them it's down at the horizon, just as for us in the Southern Hemisphere, the Hercules cluster is down at the horizon as well. Of course, what we in the Southern Hemisphere do know is that we've got by far the two best globular clusters in the whole of the sky.
We do indeed. Now, Caleb, how many images? This to me is this right? 44 images stacked on this.
That is 44. That is correct. Yes, 44.
So how long are your exposures?
Only 1 minute. So all of my exposure tonight are planned for 1 minute or 60 seconds. So
Okay.
one image is 1 minute. So easy math.
You've been on this since before we started the stream.
Yeah. So I was like, with clear skies, might as well do some imaging myself.
So this, for those watching, this is being stacked live. So this is a live view of Messier 13. Now, while Caleb jumps to his next object, hang on, before we do, Oliver wants to know, don't leave us hanging. What are our two best globs? Don't leave them hanging.
That's an easy one. So we actually looked. What was it? 1 or 2 sessions ago, we actually looked at the 3 brightest globular clusters in the Southern Hemisphere. So by far the brightest biggest is Omega Centauri, which has about 5 million stars in it. The second brightest is 47 Tucana in the constellation Tucana. And that has a beautiful, dense, bright core to it. I actually prefer looking at 47 Tucana to Omega Centauri. And then we did also look at M22, which is the globular cluster in the biggest of the globular clusters in Sagittarius, which for us in the Southern Hemisphere is up in the high in the sky. So it's a good object for us to look at. For Northern Hemisphere, for Charles Messier from Paris, he would have seen M22 very low on the horizon. So he would have just said, well, I don't know what that is, but it's definitely not a comet, so don't bother with it.
There we go. Question answered. Hayden would like to know what gear you're using.
Absolutely. So if I find it, there we go. So I'm using currently an 8-inch photographic Newtonian riding on a Skywatcher EQ6R. My camera currently is the ZWO ASI 294MC Pro, and I do have a narrowband filter on at the moment, or a dual band filter rather, which is not ideal for broadband target like globular clusters, but because I'm shooting so low, the only chance I can see anything is to use a filter. So yeah, 8-inch Newt. That's not actually my primary imaging telescope anymore, but for tonight, that's the one that I'm using.
All right, so we're going to jump across to, I'm not sure what Mr. Prism Break has got going on in his stream, but he should have Triffer Nebula up, and he hasn't. So we'll have to wait for him to get that one ready while Caleb moves to his next object. And Caleb's next object will be M57, the Ring Nebula, but we're going to have a look at Triffer Nebula while Caleb slews across and starts capturing some data. So. I know what that is. That's the message that was sent. There we go. Looks a lot like a computer game from the 80s.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really does. I was wondering what was on your screen there for a second, Lee. But
I was trying to explain what it was, but I don't know if you could hear me.
We can now because I've added you back in.
There you go. Oh, that would be why. Yes. So that's the 7 different things. But it's probably easier for people to look that up.
Yeah. Of course, for the alien life forms somewhere in the Great Hercules Cluster, the little red man in the middle may be absolutely meaningless to them, and the green blobs up at the top could be totally full of meaning.
Yes. it could be
Very
a message
colourful species on this planet.
a message of war, for all we know.
Pac-Man dinner,
Well,
pretty much.
so we'll get rid of those. Hang on.
There we go. Now, this is some data, because it's been such horrible weather in Melbourne. What we have, 2 weeks of lockdown, and it was cloudy for that entire 2 weeks of lockdown. And then we managed to creep out of it on Tuesday. And then Tuesday night, we got one night of clear skies. So Lee did some recording of live stacking of Triffids. So while Caleb gets off to the next one, the Ring Nebula, we'll have a look at Lee's live imaging of Triffer Nebula. And I think, Steve, you're going to take this one.
Right, okay. Well, I'll do an introduction to it, and then I know that Stefan has some really good detailed information about how some of the inner workings of the M20, the Triffer Nebula. Just some basic information about it. So we're in Sagittarius, so the Triffer Nebula. For those that have been following us over some of these live viewings that we've been doing, the Triffer Nebula is fairly close to the Lagoon Nebula. So I think with a wide field view, you can actually get the Lagoon and the Triffer Nebula in the same view, I think. So it's about it's a combination. If I get this right, and perhaps I'll defer to Stefan, but it's a combination of a reflection nebula and an emission nebula. So if we had a coloured image, there would be some part of it. The main part of it is red, and that's the emission nebula. And then there's another part of it to the top there, near that bright orange coloured star, which is a blue colour, and that's the reflection nebula. But I'll leave that for Stefan to talk perhaps a little bit more about. If you're okay with that, Stefan?
Yeah, absolutely. So do you have anything else you want to discuss?
Well, just a couple of facts, I suppose, that it's this is about 5,000 light years away. So it's reasonably close to us. And a beautiful object to look at, obviously through an imaging system, but also a really nice object to look at just through a normal telescope and an eyepiece. You can actually make out those dark lines in a medium-sized telescope, probably an 8 or a 10-inch telescope. But sorry, Stefan, I'll defer back to you.
Yeah, no. So so the name Triffer Nebula, I believe, comes about because of the sort of dark lanes within the middle of the emission nebula that sort of carve it into a sort of trifoil or three sort of segments. But as Steve was mentioning, there are a couple different components of the Triffer Nebula. There is the red emission nebula, which is the sort of bright hydrogen alpha that you see in this image on the screen, and then the blue reflection nebula in the top. But also the dark sort of streaks that are dividing it into that sort of three sort of segments. That's what we call the Dark Nebula, where the dust and gas in the cloud that makes up the nebula is condensed down under its own gravity to a point where it's starting to block the light from behind it. And so this is why the Triffer Nebula is a really, really popular target for us astro imagers. It really beautifully highlights the three main types of nebulae: emission, reflection, and absorption. And so, like most emission nebulae, the Triffer Nebula comes about, well, at least the emission part comes about because there is an embedded cluster of newly born stars that sits right within that cloud. The largest of the stars within the cluster is around 20 times the mass of our own sun. So these are very, very young, very massive, big, bright stars that are then throwing off a lot of high energy ultraviolet radiation, exciting the gas around them, which is what we're seeing. Another little interesting thing about the Triffer Nebula, If you can see sort of into the core of it, there's this weird sort of peak shape towards the bottom, which I think we're zooming into now. And unofficially, but sort of to us amateurs, we call this little peak the snail or the slug, because if you have a telescope with a high enough resolution, you'll actually see these two sort of jets popping out on top of that mound, and it really does look like the eyes of a snail or a slug. And these stellar jets, as they're called, are actually formed by newly birthed stars that, because of the stellar wind that they're exhausting, are blowing out in these long streams some of the nebula gas. So here on screen, this is unfortunately, I wish one of us could take a photo like this, but this is the Hubble Space Telescope, a 2-meter diameter telescope in low Earth orbit. So, spectacular resolution, doesn't have to contend with the atmosphere and the clouds that we do in Melbourne. But this image you can really see highlights those stellar jets that are poking out. And, hopefully you can see as well as I do that this really does look like a slug. So, like other emission nebulae, the Triffer Nebula is it's a stellar birthplace. It's an area where new stars are being birthed from collapsing nebula material. And by looking at the Triffer Nebula with some longer wavelengths of light, particularly infrared, these are professional telescopes, namely the Spitzer infrared space telescope, looking deep into the core of the Triffer Nebula. There have been a number of what we call embryonic stars. So these are very, very new stars that have essentially just begun igniting nuclear fusion within their core. And 30 embryonic stars and around 120 newborn stars have been found within this region. So, these beautiful, beautiful clouds are essentially you're witnessing the birth of stars just like our own sun. And, perhaps at some point in our distant past, our sun would have arisen from a beautiful nebula cloud like this.
So humans would have seen, as they looked up into the sky, would actually have seen the birth of this object, because it's estimated that it's only about 300,000 years old. So it's a real baby. It's a lovely object. I really like looking at this object through my visual telescope when I'm in it. You have to be in a dark sky site to really see it properly. But you can definitely see those dark, the dark lanes that we can easily see, obviously, in this image.
Right, so Caleb, are you ready for us to go to your next object?
Yep, we're on M57.
Yep, Ring Nebula. Here we go.
It's tiny.
Now, it is tiny.
Yeah, and actually the size of it is sort of what tripped up some of the earlier astronomers, particularly, I'll say that this was actually discovered, M57, the Ring Nebula as it's called, was discovered by Charles Messier, who is the namesake of the Messier catalogue. So whenever we say, an object like M57, which this is, that M denotes Messier. Now, Charles Messier, as we've said before, he was actually a cometary astronomer. So he was looking for comets. And the purpose of his catalogue, the Messier catalogue, was to make a list of things that aren't comets, right? Because he was interested in comets. This is an object that is not a comet. Now, he discovered this in 1779. And when it was followed up by some other astronomers, namely a French astronomer named Antoine Dacuier, if I'm pronouncing that nearly correct, this astronomer, Antoine, described it as looking like a planet that's fading, a sort of dull planet. And it's actually thought that this is what gives rise to the name Planetary Nebula. So this is what we now call a planetary nebula, but now, of course, we know that it has nothing to do with planets. It's not a planet. It's not in our solar system. It's, in fact, the remnants of a slowly dying stellar mass star. So, yeah, this is essentially the namesake of the name Planetary Nebula. So, M57, the Ring Nebula, it's located in the constellation Lyra, and it's around 2,500 light years off in the distance. It's, as you can see, a relatively small object when compared to some of the other larger emission nebulae. It's around 2.5 light years in diameter, in contrast to the hundreds of light years that we've been talking about. So it's actually a relatively bright object. It's got a visual magnitude around 8.8. So it's bright-ish as nebulae go, but because it's so small, it's only around 1.5 arc minutes in diameter. It's too small to resolve with binoculars. So you'll need at least a 3-inch telescope, and ideally something around 8-inch. So if you've got like an 8-inch Dobsonian, this is a fantastic target. You'll definitely be able to resolve that ring structure and some of the dim portion towards the center.
One of my favourite objects, Stefan, to look at through my 10-inch scope or my 12-inch scope. It's a beautiful object.
I've got to give it a go. I've never seen it myself, so I've never imaged it. This is the first time I'm seeing a non-Hubble image of it, so it's quite spectacular. But so as you'll see, it looks like a ring, and it used to be thought that it was sort of a spherical shape, and we were just sort of seeing the outer surface as red and the sort of flatter surface as blue. But now we know that it's actually more sort of like a cylinder shape. It's a bipolar starburst nebula is what it's called. So it's sort of looking through the end of a cylinder almost. And you'll notice that there's a dramatic color difference from the edges into the center. And that's because the outer edges are mostly dominated by nitrogen or ionized nitrogen and ionized hydrogen, which give off this characteristic sort of red color. But then towards the center, it goes a sort of soft bluish, which is really characteristic of ionized oxygen. And, most planetary nebulae like this give off in those particular emission wavelengths, hydrogen alpha and oxygen 3. And so they're fantastic objects to image using narrowband filters. And I guess one thing that I can add, actually defining what a planetary nebula is. So stars, as they end their life, as they run out of their nuclear fuel, they evolve into a sort of new phase of their life. If a star is small enough, like our own sun, it will sort of slowly bloat up and become a red giant, and those outer layers of its atmosphere will slowly dissipate out into surrounding space and form a planetary nebula like this. So our own sun, eventually, in around 5 billion years, once it's exhausted its hydrogen fuel, will slowly sort of start to swell up, engulfing the inner rocky planets, and eventually fade away into a planetary nebula like this, leaving a very dense, very small core that's called a white dwarf. And you can, in this image, just about make out that core right in the middle of the ring. There's a very sort of small white dot, and that's, in fact, the core of this nebula, the core of the star that birthed this nebula.
Yeah.
Let's hope that in another few billion years, when our sun reaches the end of its life, that it leaves a legacy of such a beautiful object.
Absolutely.
Stefan, I just want to rub it in. I know you're saying you haven't imaged this. I've seen it. I may have taken a photo of it with my phone through the 40-inch up at our Dark Sky site.
Oh, man. Yeah, I think I've been itching to try and convince someone to let me put like a proper astronomy camera on that 40-inch. Oh man,
Only
one day.
nights when there's only nights when there's no one wanting to look through it.
True.
You've got more chance with the 25 than the 40. So, do you guys have anything else to add to that, or should we move to M56? And then while our fake northerner, who told me that he's not from Brisbane, he's from Gold Coast. It's close enough. It's same, isn't it? But he's going to move to M56.
56.
And then while he does that, Lee has loaded up Space Engine, so we can have a bit of a Space Engine look at Ring Nebula. So this is in Space Engine. So we can pan around it, maybe even fly through it, Lee. I don't know if what that would do, but
Whoop, too fast.
Too fast.
Hang on.
3.7 astronomical units per second. Oh, we'll just spin around. This is quite a fun little program, this Space Engine.
There's some thinking that if alien life forms on in another part of the Milky Way would probably call this object the Tube Nebula rather than the Ring Nebula, because as Stefan pointed out, they think it's a cylinder rather than a ring. And in fact, one of the objects that we'll be looking at in a couple of objects' time, which is the Dumbbell Nebula, is sort of the opposite. So they think that if you looked at it from another perspective, it would look like the Ring Nebula rather than a dumbbell shape. So we'll see.
And one thing I can point out about the simulation here in Space Engine, you can probably just make out those two sort of fainter shells surrounding. No, actually, further than that. Yeah, those two very, very faint red shells. Whether or not that accurately simulates what surrounds the actual Ring Nebula, I'm not 100% sure. But this is a really common thing that we see around planetary nebulae. Because as stellar mass stars are sort of reaching the end of their life, they don't sort of release all of their gas uniformly. They tend to sort of do it in stages. And so a lot of these planetary nebulae are sort of surrounded by much, much larger, much, much fainter and older shells of nebulosity. And the Dumbbell Nebula, which we were just talking about, is a great example of this. Whether we'll see those really faint outer shells, I'm not sure, but when we take really, really long exposures, we can start to bring them out. This is a nice challenge for us imagers, is to sort of show as much as is really there.
Oh, look at that. That's impressive. Okay, so I think we might move to the next object now. We'll bring our fake northerners. Oh, there it is. That's one stack, I'm guessing.
That's just a 6-second exposure. I'm running autofocus.
Oh, yeah, 6 seconds.
So this is M57, is that right?
It is M56.
M56, sorry, yes. So this is another globular cluster, just like the Hercules cluster, which we were talking about before. And you can sort of see that, well, in astronomy, globular clusters sort of have a bad reputation because a lot of people say, when you've seen one, you've seen them all. They're just balls of stars, right? But, that's not entirely true. They all sort of have their own shape, their own morphology. They're all interesting in their own way. And you can definitely see that this one is quite different to the Hercules cluster. A little less spectacular, but it is quite different. So this particular cluster, it's a lot less dense. It's a lot further at around 33,000 light years away. And this one's a little bit fainter as well. It's around magnitude 8.3. So it's a pretty difficult object to see with binoculars. You'll definitely want a telescope and particularly around 8-inch in diameter to start to resolve some of the stars within the core. This globular cluster is around 84 light years in diameter, so it is itself a lot smaller than the Hercules cluster. But in fact, it's actually older than the Hercules cluster. This one's around 13.7 billion years old, which, given the fact that the entire universe is only around 14.8 billion years old, this globular cluster formed relatively quite recently after the formation of the universe. So it's, you know, it's easy to get lost in these numbers, but just sort of embrace the idea that what we're looking at now formed, 13.7 billion years ago, long before there was life on Earth, before there was an Earth, before there was a sun. This is a really, really ancient remnant of the universe. And so this globular cluster contains around 230,000 solar masses, so a few 100,000 stars in total. And actually, one really interesting fact about this globular cluster is that it's in what's called a retrograde orbit around the galaxy. So as we were talking about before, large interstellar objects like the galaxy share a sort of common rotation due to their conserved angular momentum. And in fact, the galaxy sort of rotates very, very slowly over hundreds of millions of years in a particular direction. And this globular cluster is actually orbiting around our galaxy in the opposite direction. And that's because this globular cluster is thought to have actually originated from a different dwarf galaxy that was sort of consumed and merged with our own Milky Way galaxy. Something that is actually called the Gaia sausage. That's a bit of a funny term, but it's sort of a collection of globular clusters and stars that are thought to have originated from a smaller dwarf galaxy, which was consumed by the Milky Way, of which the Omega Centauri globular cluster, the largest globular cluster, is actually thought to be the core of. And this globular cluster, you can image it every day of your life and you'll see essentially no movement, but it is actually moving really, really fast, 180 kilometers per second. And because of that really high speed, it's actually heating up some of the interstellar medium, some of that gas in the galaxy. It's heating that up as it moves through it. And the gas that is sort of trailing out behind it is around 940,000 degrees Celsius. So, incredibly, incredibly high temperatures.
Stefan,
yeah.
How energetic is your mind feeling tonight? I've got a cracking question one of our viewers wants to ask you.
Go for it.
Can you give us a simple idea of what angular momentum means?
Yeah, so imagine a truck driving down a highway, and imagine you just turn off the engine of that truck. The truck will keep going, and it'll keep going because it has a property that we call momentum, right? It's built up that speed. That speed can't just instantly disappear. It slowly loses its momentum as it travels along. Now, angular momentum is just that same concept, but instead of something going in a straight line, it's rotating around some axis. So like, those, I can't remember what they're called, but those toys you get on at the park as a child, and your dad spins you around and around and around.
A whirligig.
That thing, yes, a whirligig, yes.
Or a chuck-it bucket.
A chuck-it bucket.
Yeah, there you go. That's I like that name better. Yeah, so that object, once you've put energy into it, it has momentum, but because it's rotating around, it has what we call angular momentum. And so just like a whirligig or a chuck-it bucket, objects like globular clusters are sort of rotating around their own axis, and so they have what we call angular momentum.
There we go. I think that's a very, very good explanation. Did make sense to me, but it made sense to Grace.
I was scribbling it down there while you were
scribbling
talking.
it down? It made sense to our viewer who asked the question, and that's what matters.
That's what we need.
Now,
For those of sorry.
I was going to say, what makes star clusters?
Gravity.
Yeah. Essentially that.
I'll leave it to Stefan to elaborate on that a little bit more.
Yeah, no, I mean, in one word, you've given the answer. That's essentially what happens. So
that's probably the most successful that I have ever been ever.
So, I guess one way I can explain it is, so imagine going back in time to the start of the universe, and after the universe, there was sort of just an almost uniform sort of cloud of gas and dust made of hydrogen and helium. And over large distances, that cloud just sort of started slowly pulling itself together. Some areas were a little bit more dense, and so more gas would fall towards those regions. And over, astronomical timescales, more and more gas accumulated under its own gravity, and eventually enough gas accumulates that the density of that gas becomes high enough that it can start nuclear fusion and become a star. And when you have a lot of gas in the same region and it all accumulates into one big sort of globular region, enough of that gas will ignite into stars that we will have a sort of globular cluster of stars. And we can see that in action on smaller scales inside of our galaxy in what we call open clusters. So one object that we may be able to image when summer comes around is the Pleiades cluster. And so that's an example of an open cluster where there's you can see some of the surrounding gas and dust that's slowly condensing into new stars.
Got some more questions as well. They're coming in thick and fast now. What have we got? How are temperatures like 980,000 degrees estimated? So they just go, oh yeah, that looks hot. That about 980,000. It's not quite a million.
That's a great question. I really wish we had Claire on here to explain that one. Yeah, there. I think yeah.
Sorry, you've only got me, Stefan, and I've got no idea.
Look, I reckon Neil's watching as well. I think Neil might be able to answer that one in the comments. I'll throw that one over to him. If he doesn't, sorry, Neil, I've put you in a spot, but he might know the answer. He's the sort of person that may know that answer as well. So we might come back to that one, see if we can get you an answer. And Aaron wants to know, is it possible to see the Butterfly Nebula with a telescope?
Yes, the answer is absolutely yes. But the Butterfly Nebula, being another planetary nebula, is really, really small. So if you want to, see it for yourself with your own eyes, you won't be able to see it with binoculars. You'll need something with a bit more resolving power. So a large aperture telescope like a Dobsonian or something even larger. And to image it, you would want something like a Schmidt-Cassegrain telescope or something like that with a lot of focal length, something that can really magnify the image for you.
Now, we got another one. Robert off YouTube wants to know what starts the cluster rotating. Is that back to gravity again?
Yeah, back to gravity, back to conservation of momentum. So it's not that there's sort of any particular thing that starts it off in one sort of axis of rotation. It's sort of just the total net rotation. Yeah, that's a difficult one for me to explain. I'm sorry.
That's all right. We can only answer what we can answer. So we do what we can. Now, we might move to our next object, which is an M27 the Helix Nebula. But while we do, I think Lee has in Space Engine, he's got M56 for us to have a look at. There we go. Whoa. Whoa. We're doing a bit of Star Wars there. We're flying. Felt like I was in the Millennium Falcon for a second there. We're trying to do the Kessel running 12 parsecs for you, Lee.
That's good.
So,
sorry, go on, Stefan.
I don't know if this program will actually accurately simulate it, but I know in the bottom left-hand corner, I think it's the left-hand corner, you can change the scale of time, and you can sort of watch the orbits of things. If you can speed it up fast enough, I wonder if it'll show us the actual orbits of the stars within the globular cluster. Probably not, because those timescales are absolutely massive.
Yeah,
but
it does in a lot of objects, but I think globular are one that and nebulas are ones it doesn't show.
Yeah, no, that's fair. But I guess one thing that I sort of want to emphasize to the viewers who may not know that much about astronomy is that, all of these objects, they're constantly in motion. The universe is a dynamic system. It's constantly moving. It's just that the distances involved are so large that within our tiny human lifespan, we essentially see them as static. But an object like this, imagine all of these stars with their own trajectories, their own orbits, and globular clusters are a beautiful example of this. They really are just these chaotic systems, stars buzzing in and out, flying all around, being shot out, being shot in. So really try and imagine this beautiful, beautiful system of stars as it really is.
The stars are very old, though, in globular clusters, so they're actually quite stable. We don't get a lot of these young, wild blue stars. And I think the image there shows there's a lot of orange-coloured stars, so stars that are approaching they're in, like myself, in mature.
So Grace wants to know what program this is. This is Space Engine, Grace. It's I think there is a free version, but this is the paid version's got a little bit more to it. I'm led to believe, but it's a pretty cool little program.
And I was just, it's funny, like even when we look at something like this and you think, well, there's just so many stars in there. Well, you can add the labels in this, and you can actually see so many of these have actually been labeled and like catalogued. And that's what amazes me when you start to look at, so we can actually click on, maybe one of these, and it'll tell us details. Like one of the viewers earlier asked about the temperature, so we can see that this particular one I've clicked on, it's saying that it's a temperature of, or maybe a surface temperature, I guess, of 3,240 Kelvin.
It's estimated that most of the brightest stars in M56 are about 13th magnitude. So with a reasonable sized telescope, you can resolve a few of the brighter stars, but that's why most, a globular cluster tends to appear as primarily a misty patch. With an 8 or a 10-inch telescope, you can resolve stars down to about magnitude 14-ish. So we're at the very limit of resolving individual stars. Some of the closer globular clusters, we talked about Omega Centauri and 47 Tucana and M22, and the Hercules cluster M13, you're able to resolve a lot more stars in that because it's actually a lot close. They're actually a lot closer to us than M56, which I think Stefan said is about over 30,000 light years away. so quite a fair old distance away. Just from a visual point of view, I think you'll probably have gathered from the conversation that the objects that we're looking at are actually up to the north of us, down towards the horizon, and obviously for us in Melbourne, very close to the horizon. For Caleb, a little bit higher, 10 degrees higher. But these objects are primarily in the constellations Lyra and Cygnus, the Swan. So this object is in Lyra, and actually fairly close to the Ring Nebula, which is probably, well, more than probably, it is the most famous object in Lyra. Cygnus lies just a little bit further over to the east, and in fact, part of Cygnus, I don't think we can actually see it from here in Melbourne. We only get to see the sort of top half of Cygnus, or if you're in the northern hemisphere, the bottom half. One of the lovely objects that you can see at the top of Cygnus is Albireo, which is a beautiful binary star with a blue component and a sort of a yellowish component. And M56 sort of sits equidistant between the Ring Nebula and Albireo.
Okay, I think we've got our next object ready to jump across to, which is not Helix Nebula. Caleb is in lockdown mode and he got confused. It's actually Dumbbell Nebula. So we jump across the Dumbbell. He's confused. Yeah. There we go. Steve and Stefan are like, "Oh my God, no, he's confused us."
No, it's fine. He's got it right.
He told me it was Helix. So.
If I was an alien, I'd be calling this the Ring Nebula because I'd be looking at it from a different angle.
Well, if you're on completely the opposite side, it'd still be Dumbbell.
It's interesting because if just from what we've seen tonight, the Dumbbell Nebula here, M27, looks remarkably similar to that flyby view that we had of the Ring Nebula earlier on, with sort of a ring shape and then the two bluish coloured sort of plumes sticking out between the dumbbell.
I like to refer to it as the apple core. It looks like an apple core.
Yeah, that's good, isn't it? With the red apple.
Red apple with the middle of it eaten out.
I do like that, but I've got to admit, when you see the entire sort of outer shells, I 100% advocate the name Bowtie Nebula. You can't quite see it in this image, but sort of where the blue portions are, shooting out on either side of those, there are these really obvious sort of triangles, and it really does look like a bow tie. But like I was talking about before, those outer shells can be very, very faint. And so you can see we're not exactly able to pick them out in the exposures that we're using. But again, if we were able to image for hours and hours before this stream happened, we may start to see them. Steve, do you want to start off with some facts, or do you want me to rip into it?
Fire away. I know this is another of your favourite ones, I think, from some of the past streams that we've done. I think it is, anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I love planetary nebulae in general, just because I like to imagine that, one day our own sun will become something just like this. And, granted, it's in 5 billion years plus, but this will eventually be the fate of our own sun. And whether or not humans are still here in some form, some weird-looking alien form, I think I'd love to imagine that we would be able to see, or some form of life would be able to see what our sun would look like. But so yeah, this is another beautiful example of what we call a planetary nebula. Again, has nothing to do with planets. This is the sort of death throes of a very, very old sun-massed star. And this particular one is in the constellation Vulpecula, also known as the Little Fox. and this one's around 1,300 light years away. And again, it's quite a bright planetary nebula at around magnitude 7.5. And this one, as you can see, is a little bigger than the Ring Nebula. It's around 8 arc minutes in diameter. And so because of this, it's easily visible in binoculars. But, again, the larger the telescope you have, the better. You'll be able to resolve some more of that bright core. And so this is actually the first planetary nebula that was ever discovered, again, by Charles Messier in the year 1764. And so as I was explaining, planetary nebulae form because stars around the same mass as our sun sort of run out of nuclear fuel, and so they lose their the outer layers of their atmosphere into their surroundings. And as I explain it, it sort of sounds like a slow, sort of soft release of gas, but really these are quite highly energetic and quite rapid releases and outbursts of gas. And in fact, the gas that makes up this nebula, it's been measured that it's releasing gas at around 30 kilometers per second. And because we can measure the rate of that expansion, we can track back this sort of age of the nebula. And so we know that this expansion started around 10,000 years ago. So, relatively recently on the human timescale and the astronomical timescale. And yeah, as I mentioned before, there are sort of these two earlobes on either side of the blue portion of the planetary nebula. So you can sort of tell that these planetary nebulae have a very peculiar structure. They're not very spherical, as you may suspect for a lot of astronomical objects. They tend to be very asymmetrical. And a lot of that lends to the fact that these are stars with, planetary systems around them. A lot of sort of material, rocky material, gaseous material that orbit in a plane. And that plane sort of constricts the regions around which the gas can sort of eject from. So they tend to eject more gas towards the top and the bottom of that plane than within that plane. And because of that, they sort of lend to these really sort of strange looking asymmetrical structures. And again, like I mentioned with the Ring Nebulae, planetary nebulae typically emit a lot of oxygen, a lot of light in the sort of oxygen 3 wavelength and the hydrogen alpha wavelength. So if you're an imager, these are fantastic targets to use dual band filters with, or even narrow band filters. It really helps bring out some of the more faint outer shells.
Now, I have been fed some information on the temperatures we were talking about earlier. I've been speaking to Claire, and she has clarified a few bits and pieces for me, and it's pretty much exactly what Neil put in the comments. And Stefan, Claire says that you should have known this because it's known as the Stefan Boltzmann Law.
Oh no! Oh no! Look, is it Stefan spelt with an F or a PH?
Yes, it is.
It's PH.
It's
with an F. Oh dear!
Exactly.
You should have known.
That's a great injustice to my name.
It's a Stefan Boltzmann law describes the power radiated from a black body in terms of its temperature. Specifically, states that the total energy radiated per unit surface area of a black body across all wavelengths per unit in time is directly proportional to the fourth power of the black body's thermodynamic temperature, and that all just went straight over my head. So I don't know whether you might be able to explain that in layman mark terms.
Yeah, I guess I sort of can. So what that's a beautiful explanation, but for those of us who haven't done physics, it's a complicated way of saying that the hotter something is, the higher the wavelengths of light that it emits. And so that's one way that we can sort of determine the temperature of objects out there in the cosmos, is by measuring the wavelengths of light that are emanated from them. The higher the frequency, so the lower the wavelength of the light, the higher the temperature of that object.
That's interesting, Stefan, because in my sort of usual dumb way, I was going to sort of suggest that you could probably gauge the temperature from the colour. And I'm not that far removed, am I really?
No. You're 100% accurate. So colour is a measurement of wavelength. Blue is a very high frequency form of light, and red is a lower frequency form of light. So absolutely, when talking about stars, the color that we see is absolutely an indicator of their temperature.
So this is from, it looks like it's from Spitzer. I'm not sure if this it kind of does look like your bow tie you're talking about. It looks a lot like butterfly pasta though. I reckon
it's infrared.
It's butterfly pasta. It's the butterfly pasta nebula from now on.
So so infrared wavelengths of light. Infrared light is able to penetrate through colder material that optical light can't. So when we look at objects when we look at the infrared light coming from objects, we can see through a lot of the gas that we can't when we look in optical wavelengths. And so what you can see in this particular image is that there are these really sort of fine tendrils that are emanating directly from that core. And of course, because we're using infrared, we can see a lot of the stars in the background as well. And yeah, you can definitely make out sort of on that right side part of that ear or that sort of bow tie structure.
Now, we're going to have a look at the space engine version of Dumbbell while Caleb moves across to the Eastern Veil Nebula. So while Caleb gets that one set up and running, we'll jump across to the space engine version of Dumbbell. And Steve, this one, you can have a bit of a chat about this one because we've just lost Stefan for a moment.
So it's not that much. In fact, when I look at Caleb's image, I reckon that looks better than what it does in Space Engine. Again, it's not. It's one of those
nice
things
misty
where
patch, isn't it?
Sorry,
it's a nice misty patch.
Yeah, it actually looks like a cube from this angle.
It does look like a cube from that angle. Can't sharpen it up at all, can we? Or
no.
There you go. That angle's good.
That's better.
Can we fly through it like we did the last one, just for a bit of fun?
Oh, that went pear-shaped last time. Hang on.
Just don't go as fast next time.
That does look like a dumbbell, doesn't it?
It does look like a dumbbell from that
angle. Yeah,
absolutely looks like a dumbbell from that angle. So I just wanted to give a shout out to all of those people who've been giving us stars throughout the stream tonight. We really do appreciate that. It's all helps us to bring you these streams. And yes, Christina, this program is off the chain. It really is. It's quite crazy. It's a wonderful little thing. It's a good little addition to our live streams now, just to be able to sort of move around the object that we're live stacking for you. Something a little bit different than what we've been doing previously. So there's spots where it looks a bit like a dumbbell, a bit like an apple core. You can see why it's got that name.
It's really like an apple core there, with the red outer skin and the white flesh.
Yeah.
And then when you get that to that angle, it just looks like a smudge.
Do you want to just explain, Mark, a bit about the stars?
Oh, the stars. Yes, this is all new. For the people watching on Facebook, they've introduced this thing called stars. We didn't know anything about it. And it's not just the stars we're looking at in the sky, it's stars on Facebook. And we looked at our live stream from last weekend. We had some stars. And we're like, what are these stars? And we'd been given stars by a few people. One of them's watching tonight, Michelle Harland. She gave us some stars last weekend. We looked into them. We're like, oh, wow, people have donated money. And we're like, this is pretty cool. So for those who have given us stars, essentially what we're going to do with those stars is use them to bring you guys more stuff, more of these things. You get more access to more programs that we can use to stream stuff to you. Also to go towards the fundraising that we're doing with our All Abilities Astronomy projects. We're going to try and, it's not a great deal, but it's every little bit helps. It's very new to us, so we're still trying to learn and work it out. And we've had quite a few people do stars tonight, so I wanted to thank those people who have given us stars or donated to us. It's much appreciated, not expected, but yeah, we're very, very, very happy, and we're glad that you're enjoying the stream so much that you're willing to do that. So we do thank you a lot for that. Now we have, here we go. Tim is saying that it looks more like a hamburger than the hamburger galaxy. It looks more like a hamburger than the hamburger galaxy. Oh, Tim, I reckon hamburger galaxy looks a lot like a hamburger. More like a hamburger than this does, that's for sure. Unless you're talking a hamburger that's stacked with lettuce and tomato, then this one definitely looks more like that. And Tamara Gamil, yes, Tamara, you did send us some. We did get them, and we do appreciate them. Thank you very much. So now, Caleb, have you got an image up yet?
I've got one exposure of
one exposure of the Eastern Veil Nebula.
Eastern Veil, yeah.
Let's jump across to that. Oh, you can just make it out there, can't you?
Oh, well, that,
from one exposure. Steve, I'll let you start with that one, hey?
Well, I don't know a lot about the Veil Nebula, but this is the first time that I've sort of seen it live, if you like. One of the problems, so the Veil Nebula, we're going to see three components of it tonight. This is the eastern part of the Veil Nebula. Then I think we'll switch over to the western.
We'll switch over to the Pickering.
Oh, there we go. There's the and then sort of in the middle is a thing called Pickering's Triangle, which is that sort of blob over in the middle there. Which
we are going to go to Pickering's Triangle. We're just starting with the
two bright edges. The object that we're looking at the moment is the eastern. That's the western.
That's the eastern.
Oh, is that the eastern?
Yeah,
that's
the eastern. It's flipped, yeah. According to Wikipedia, at least.
Oh, right.
Northern Hemisphere, and it's upside down.
Yes. Good point. Yes. So just to confuse things, the Eastern Veil Nebula is the Western Veil Nebula, and vice versa. I don't have a huge amount of information about this. As I say, this is not an object that I know very well. One of the problems with it, that personally, I do mainly visual astronomy, and this is actually a very difficult object to look at visually through a telescope from Melbourne. One reason is it's very low to the horizon, and two is it's a big object. It's a huge object, and it's quite difficult to see. You think, oh well, we'll look at this through binoculars, but it's not bright enough to see in binoculars. But it's about 2,500 light years away, the whole the Veil Nebula. It's what's called the Cygnus loop. Is the whole thing. It's part of a big loop in Cygnus. In the northern hemisphere, this is much easier to see because it's much higher in the sky, but not for us down here.
So just for reference, I'm currently pointing at 18 degrees above the horizon.
So we would be here about 8 degrees above the horizon.
8 degrees.
Yeah.
So
pretty low.
it will
So
get to a maximum of 31.
Yeah, I'm not even sure that we'd be able to see it from our visual observing field at the LNDSS up at Heathcote because of the low trees that we have around the edge of the field. I suspect we would not get to see it.
Yeah, and it would be even worse to image. Speaking as an astro imager, the lower in the sky that the object is that you're trying to photograph, the worse the image quality because you're looking through more and more atmosphere. So when you look at an object that's around 30 degrees up from the horizon, you're looking through essentially 2 atmospheres worth of the atmosphere, as opposed to when you're looking at something that's directly overhead. And that atmosphere, that more atmosphere at the lower elevations, has a really horrible effect on images. It essentially blurs it out a lot more. So like Steve said, the Veil Nebula is a supernova remnant, so a star much, much bigger than our own sun, around 20 times the solar mass of our own sun, ended its life in one of the most spectacular explosions in the entire universe. And this happened around 10 to 20,000 years ago. So there would have been humans, Homo sapiens, on Earth at that time, and they would have been able to see the light from this explosion. It would have been about as bright as Venus and would have been probably visible in the daytime. Now, they would have had no idea what this was, but now what we're seeing are the remnants of that explosion, the sort of cobwebs of this star that died so long ago. And so what we see, this sort of Eastern Veil Nebula, this sort of curvature here, this is just one of the sort of surfaces of the furthest extent of this explosion. And the whole Velar Nebula, the whole supernova remnant, stretches around 3 degrees in the night sky, which is 6 times the size of the full moon. So it really is this sort of massive, massive object. But of course, because its surface brightness is so low, you could never see it with your own eyes. As Steve pointed out, even in binoculars, you don't really have a chance, even in the darkest skies. It's only really when imaging with, a nice big, photon drinking telescope like Caleb's Newtonian and a dual narrowband filter that you can really sort of start to bring out some of the nebulosity from this region. And so what we're seeing on screen, this sort of curvature, this is sort of just like the outer boundary of the entire supernova remnant. And the region that we can see that sort of, the reason that we can see that sort of outer boundary and not really towards the center, it's imagine like a balloon or a bubble in front of you. When you're looking directly at that bubble, when you look through it, you're seeing just the 2 interfaces, the front of the bubble and the back of the bubble. There's not a lot of material that you're looking through. And so you can see right through that bubble. But when you're looking at the edges of the bubble, it's sort of curved around so you're looking through a lot of surface of that bubble. And you can sort of see the sort of outline of the bubble. And that's exactly what we're seeing here. We can't really see directly face on through the nebula that well, but when we look at the surface, we can see that curvature a lot better. And so because this nebula was formed as a supernova, the gases that are being released, the shock wave, is moving out incredibly fast. And the shock front from this supernova is moving around 420 kilometers per second. And that's fast enough that we're actually, within our human lives, able to detect changes within this supernova remnant. So images from 1997 and 2015 show a difference in structure within this supernova remnant. So, this image that we're taking here is going to be different from images that we take in 10 years or 20 years. So this is an example, again, of the sort of dynamics of the universe. And this is a beautiful example of the dynamics that we can actually see within our lifetimes. So, yeah, if you're interested in astroimaging, take an image of this region and then, eventually 10 years down the track, take another image and really see the universe in motion.
I can see the guys in the background chatting away, trying to find this on Space Engine. And they're not having a great deal of luck. So I think
part of the problem is it's composed of a number of NGC objects. It's such a big object that it was sort of broken up into a number of objects.
Yeah, and I think that's why Space Engine they've opted not to create it as an object, simply because it's the vastness of how it's created, formed. From what we see visually.
Can you search on Caldwell objects, Lee?
I have, and it doesn't have those ones either. It's like it skips. One of the main ones I was looking for was NGC 6960 and 6962, and it's got 699 or 6961 and 6963. It skips every one that's part of it.
The mysterious Veil Nebula.
Yeah, I'm just trying to find something else that might be even a star within one of those nebulas that I can, because I'm pretty sure the star catalogue will be in there, and if I can sort of go to that and zoom out, we might see something. But
no, Andy's on something different. We'll jump back. He's gone a little bit ahead. Now we have a question, and Christina wants to know: is it true precious metals like gold came from supernova explosions? I can see Stefan nodding his head in agreement in the background there.
Absolutely. So you can't quite see my image on the screen at the moment, but I've got a periodic table behind me. You can take my word for that. Now, I'm actually a chemistry student doing a PhD in chemistry. So all of this chemistry we can really attribute to supernovae. Essentially, all of the elements in the periodic table above, I think, iron are formed within supernova explosions. So larger stars, the larger a star is, the higher the density within the core of that star and the more heavy elements they can synthesize. So most stars, like our own sun, will just fuse hydrogen into helium, and maybe towards the end of their life will start fusing slightly larger elements. But it takes really, really large stars to start to fuse some of the higher atomic mass elements. And like we said, above iron, every element beyond iron is forged in a supernova explosion. So when these stars explode, the energy that they put out is so large that they fuse elements like gold, like cheating. I'm looking at the periodic table, like ruthenium, palladium, cadmium, tellurium, xenon, if you've heard of that, rubidium, cesium. All of these elements are forged within the heart of these gigantic stars exploding as supernovae. So, when you look at the gold ring that you got on your wedding day, don't just see it as, a pretty shiny metal. Really realize that the atoms that make up that ring were forged in the heart of a dying star. It's one of the most beautiful concepts to me.
I love it. The hippies were right. We are stardust.
Exactly.
We've got a very, very Oh, hang on. I'm not. No, that's not. That's the next object. We're jumping the gun there. Now, do we have enough stacked of this one yet, Caleb? Or
We've got if
look at
my Pix
that.
Insight would respond, I think it would be 11.
Oh wow,
That's beautiful.
so that's 11 minutes worth of imaging of the southern veil.
Yeah, 11.
Unbelievable.
Can you zoom in? Can we see some of the filaments towards the edge?
Yep.
Shannon is correct.
Beautiful.
Garbage is also stardust. He'll message me about that now, I'll tell you.
Oop, wrong way.
That is gorgeous.
Oh, here's
So-
while we're looking at this, before you go to that one, Bob, does this mean that gold found on Earth hasn't come from our sun?
Correct. It has not.
Yeah.
Our sun hasn't aged to the point that it's old enough that it can start forging, higher atomic mass elements. At the moment, our sun is just fusing hydrogen into helium. It's not massive enough. It's not old enough to start start fusion of some of the higher atomic mass elements. So all of the gold that we find on Earth was fused in the cores of ancient stars that lived, exploded long before our own sun even formed.
I was Stefan. You can probably elaborate on this a little bit. I was reading that these very old globular clusters, the stars within them are also very old, and they can actually measure some of the sort of content, if you like, and the amount of iron in these very old stars is much, much lower than it is in the sort of the newer stars. And I think that's one of the ways that they can kind of gauge how old the stars are. Am I on the right line with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So in astronomy, unlike chemistry, astronomers call anything larger than helium metals, essentially. And so one way of gauging the age of a star is to measure its metallicity, which you were pointing out. So how many sort of elements... Look, as a metalhead, I appreciate that. That's beautiful.
Sorry, I couldn't resist.
So that's one way that we can measure the age of some cosmic objects, is by measuring the content of the metals, so the non-helium elements that comprise them. And it's true that globular clusters formed so long ago that the surrounding material that they formed out of weren't rich enough in these heavier element metals. And so the stars that we find within globular clusters don't contain a lot of these heavy atomic mass metals. So they are low metallicity objects.
It was when I was reading up about M56, which was the second of the globular clusters that we looked at. And I think it was what I was reading said that the iron content was only about 5% of what a modern star would be, perhaps at our own sun.
There we go. Now, I told you he'd message me, and he did. Shannon did. He messaged me with a photo of a beer and said, "This is also stardust." He's in fine form tonight, that young man. Now, I think Caleb is getting ready. Caleb, is it far off? Did the plate sail?
Yep.
Plate
It's 10 seconds
solve,
off. First
plate
sub.
solve. I don't think we're able to get
3, 2.
space engine working on this one, so we might jump across to our next object, which is the second part of the Veil Nebula.
Trying to see
triangle.
I can see it.
Whoops.
Yeah, just.
Oh.
Let me start the live stack and I'll go back to the thingy.
So this is sort of the middle of this whole setup, isn't it? When we're talking about the east and the west veil, Pickering's triangle sort of towards the middle-ish area.
I think
Yeah.
this is
So, here.
it's the other side. Yeah. So is that the western?
Oh, it's
Oops.
right on the bottom
Sorry.
of the eastern.
Yeah.
Remember, it's upside down.
Right here.
Oh, it's over here. Oh, so it's in the middle then.
Yeah, it's in the middle.
Yeah.
So
Well-
the typical spot for images for the northern hemisphere people will be east, Pickering Triangle, and west.
Now, is it me or does that east section in that view you've got there look like a smiling skeleton side on?
It is.
It's I reckon it either looks like a combination of between Admiral Akbar and one of the face huggers from Alien.
It does indeed, actually. Very much so.
For some reason, it's not loading up.
Yeah, I need to
Pickering's
give
Triangle.
I need to give a shout out to our one Twitch follower who's watching right now. We've got more than one follower, but we've got one person on Twitch watching, and they've stuck with us, and I do appreciate that. It is a new platform for us, that's for sure. We are slowly growing on the Twitch platform. So if any of you have got friends or family that aren't on YouTube or Facebook but love astronomy and are into Twitch, we do have a Twitch account as well. I'm going to try and find
I
what
see.
it is now. I think it's the_A_S_V is our Twitch accounts.
Caleb, you've got a Twitch account, right? You stream there
I do.
occasionally, yeah?
I do.
What's your Twitch?
I've recently changed my name to Astro Caleb.
Oh my God, this
Nice.
is
How
like
often are you
shameless
streaming?
I
shameless
streamed last
self-promotion.
night for the first time in 18 days. So, yeah, not
There
often.
you go. If you're on Twitch as well, follow the ASV and follow Caleb. What was it? Astro Caleb?
Astro Caleb, one word.
Astro Caleb. It's not as good as Astro Blake. That one rolls off the tongue better. I mean, if we're doing shameless self-promotions, I can do that one, can't I? Stefan, do you have a Twitch?
I don't. No.
You don't. Okay.
No. I'm happy
So while
streaming
we're
with you
waiting
guys.
for this, we're in a little bit of a holding pattern, guys, while we wait for Caleb to
Yeah, one moment. I just figured out what the problem was. I had the name the same for Eastern, Pickering, and Western, and
Yep.
it just shoved into this one folder. So I've just renamed it.
you got to try and work it out now.
Yeah.
So look at that. Neil's jumped straight onto it. He was watching us on Facebook, and he's now watching us on Twitch. Thank you, Neil. Thank you for adding another follower to us as well. So now we're going to start stacking the
So we're on
Pickering's
Pickering's now.
ring.
So we're just about to see Pickering Triangle. It's very dim, and I'm currently at 21 degrees altitude, which is far from ideal for astroimaging.
I can make it out there. You can just see it from
Just
the
about
first one.
to.
It's very faint.
Yeah. Pickering's Triangle is quite an interesting name, but it does have another name, which is Pickering's Triangular Wisp, which is
I don't know why I called it Pickering's ring, because it's not. It's Pickering's triangle.
Pickering's Triangular Wisp, I think, is a wonderful name.
Now, have either of you, while we're waiting for this to stack, have either of you guys got any information you'd like to share on Pickering's triangle?
Not particularly. It's another portion of the Veil supernova remnant, but all of these different regions are just sort of separate parts of the same structure. So again, they came about from the supernova that led to the Veil supernova explosion. But so they're all located in roughly the same region. There's not too much to say individually about each portion. Not that I know.
The whole of the nebula was discovered by William Herschel in actually on the 5th of September 1784. So only a few years after Charles Messier was doing all of his work with his catalogue, it just really shows you the improvement in the telescope technology that was sort of going on at the time. William Herschel had access to a much more powerful telescope than our dear friend Charles, and was able to see these objects, which are, visually quite difficult objects to see.
And from an astrophotography perspective, these supernovae remnant, they're again another great example of an object that's best imaged using narrowband filters. So when you try and image them with like a normal one-shot color camera, like a DSLR or something, you're going to struggle to pick up much of the signal at all. They're very, very low surface brightness objects, very, very dim. But when you use narrowband filters like oxygen 3, hydrogen alpha, even sulfur 2 to some degree, you'll be able to sort of really bring these objects out.
Now, a little bit off topic, back to tag names. Do we have an Astro Boy? Only if he's flying high in the air. We don't have an Astro Boy that I'm aware of. Look, we've got another person watching us on Twitch, following on Twitch. Forgot I even had an account. Apparently I created it 5 years ago. Thank you for following us on Twitch.
That was me.
Oh, that was you. Oh, look at that. No, you made me look a fool. Now, while we're waiting for this image to stack, I will say that while our Dark Sky site is still closed, and we'll hopefully have it open next weekend, we do have some guys at the moment up on site, in the rain, working, putting in a new automatic gate for us as part of our All Abilities astronomy project. So this is one of the parts, well, probably the first part, I guess, of what we're trying to do up there to make it easier for people with limited mobility to access the site. And by having an automatic gate, that's going to make it a lot easier, because currently to get access to the site, you need to hop out of the car, unlock a padlock, push the gate open, and then hop back in and drive through and then close it all behind you. This will save people from having to do that. And it's all part of our All Abilities astronomy project that we're working on at the site. And I believe also the pathways, the wheelchair accessible pathways construction has started, or is very, very, very close to starting up there. So Gavin, thank you for spending your precious time away from home digging post holes today with a post hole digger in what sounds to me like rain. So much appreciated. Now, while we wait for this to stack, Andy has come and found a picture of Pickering's triangle from NASA. So this is what we're trying to image at the moment. This is what we're trying to live stack. This obviously has a lot more data thrown at it from probably a much more powerful telescope as well. But this is the area of the sky that we're looking at. This is what we're trying to bring to you guys, but live. This is not live, but we're trying to bring it to you live.
So if I can actually jump in here, this isn't actually an image taken by NASA. This is an image taken by a fellow amateur astrophotographer, a guy called JP Metzavanio. Astro Anarchy, who we've brought up on the screen here. This guy is an absolute legend in the field of astrophotography. He's from, I believe, Finland. And, being so high in latitude, it's a region where they have, extended night times within their winter, I think maybe 15, 20-hour night times. And so when it's clear for him, he's able to image for many, 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 many hours. And he's created some of the most breathtaking images. So, I forgive you for thinking that this is a NASA image, because it really is some of the most high quality examples of what us amateurs are capable of. it's an image like this is something that we all aspire to take one day. But before that, I think we need some a bit more money and our own observatories. But yeah, I mean, it goes to show what you can do with commercially available equipment. And if you've never thought about doing astrophotography yourself, it can be expensive and it can be a rabbit hole, but you can get in cheap. If you've got a DSLR and a lens and a tripod, really that's all you need to start. And once you take your first few images, it really will hook you.
How good is his surname too? Pennsylvania. That's awesome.
He does have a pretty cool surname.
Metsylvania.
Yeah, I'm just looking at his Milky Way. His mosaics. He's pretty well mosaic the whole Milky Way. He's done 234 individual mosaic panels stitched together of the Milky Way. It'll take him a little bit.
I think I only got up to about 13. I think.
I reckon it was like 2.
I was trying to find that one when I saw you bringing those ones up. I don't know if I'd find them.
I think we might need to move across to the next object. Oh, he's on it now. Oh, there we go. Look at that. He beat me to it. This is going to be our last object, unless the boys are keen or are happy to take one last request that Caleb might be able to get. I don't know, Caleb, if you might be able to.
Yeah, I'm happy to do anything.
Finish up with a galaxy, just something a little bit different for the viewers.
I'll need to find one.
But we will have a look at this first. This is the Western Veil Nebula. So, Stefan, I'm assuming I've been doing about a million things in the background here, but I'm assuming that you've covered how big the whole nebula is, east and west.
Yeah. So, like I said before, it's the entire supernova remnant, the Veil supernova remnant. It's around 3 degrees in the night sky. So that's basically 3 of your fingers held at arm's length. Around 6 times the size of the full moon. So this is a really massive object. As you can see, like this one object, we can get multiple different images in multiple different regions. So it is absolutely enormous. But again, it's incredibly, incredibly dim. So our unaided eyes don't have a chance of seeing it out there, which is, quite a shame. I wish evolution worked a little differently. I wish we could really appreciate some of the beautiful objects that are out there, but I guess that's what science and technology is for. But in the image, again, this is another portion of the Veil Nebula. This is the Western Veil Nebula, as it's called, but its more common name is the Witch's Broom Nebula. Now you can just about start seeing it coming out in the image here. Again, it's a very, very dim object, so not a lot of photons coming from this. But just sort of going from, there we go. Now you can see it. Sort of going from the middle right-hand side to the middle left-hand side of the image. You can clearly see that wispy edge of the supernova remnant. And I always saw it sort of inverted, sort of upside down. You can definitely see it like a witch's broom. So here we go. Caleb's just going to live stack it here for us in PixInsight. And again, this is really a testament to how far the technology for astrophotography has come in the past 10 years. When I started this hobby around 10 years ago, I was using a modified webcam to take my images, but now we have really low noise, high sensitivity, thermoelectrically cooled cameras available on the market for a really reasonable price. So really the barrier for entry has never been lower for astrophotography, and if you're considering it, look into it. Talk to people in our club, shoot us a message. Any of us, we're more than happy to talk about it and help you get started on your astrophotography journey.
That is actually that's true. So we've had the banner popping up every now and then throughout the night, and asv.org.au/join, and we are all a very helpful bunch, whether it's astrophotography or whether you're interested in lunar and planetary, or whether you want to do visual observing, if you're into solar or even solar astronomy. There's we've got radio astronomy as well, so we have a lot of different sections. We have a new astronomers group, so if you know nothing about astronomy, you can go to the new astronomers group and learn. We have a lone telescope program. It's pretty booked up at the moment. We're in the process of getting some more telescopes for that program. Steve has been running that program for quite a while, and he's just recently handed it over to somebody else to run, so he can look after our astronomy for the people. Events. We also we have a National Science Week event coming up that I hadn't mentioned before, which is at the Melbourne Observatory. There are still some tickets left. There are, let me see, how many tickets do we have left? I don't think we've got many. We have 31 tickets left. It's $10, and essentially you get to look through telescopes on the lawns of the Melbourne Observatory with us. We will share those with you, show you objects. We're going to be looking mainly at planets and the moon that night and the brighter objects. We'll also give a bit of a history of the observatory, and I have been informed that we are very confident that we'll be able to open the dome to take small groups through, groups of 4 at a time, to hopefully look through the larger telescopes as well. That's not 100% confirmed yet, but it is something we're hoping to be able to do at that event. $10 a ticket, and all that money goes to our Pathways to the Planets project as well. And
what date is that?
That is the 21st of August, starting at 7 p.m. So thank you. I didn't even think to. I was just reading that off. And look at that. Ben Williams recently joined in. This is my first live stream. Great stuff. Welcome aboard, Ben. Glad to have you as a member. Hopefully you can get up to the Dark Sky site once it's reopened to our members. Now,
if you miss out on the Melbourne Observatory session, it's limited to 100 people, so
it is, yes.
not that many people. We do have another public event coming up in September at Caulfield Racecourse. I'm just trying to think what the date of that is going to be. I think it's the 20-something of September. It'll be advertised on the website and in social media. Hopefully we'll be able to have more people attending that event.
I'm hoping to put another event live tomorrow. I'm just waiting on one last bit of confirmation. On the 14th of August, an event at our Dark Sky sites, which will be the Lions Club of Heathcote have come on board, and they're going to provide a sort of like a picnic dinner for anyone who wants to come along. Really, it's a ticketed event. It's going to be $70 a ticket. You'll get a sort of like a meat cheese platter, or there's a vegan option for that one. We'll have a burger option, beef, chicken, or vegan veggie burger with the dessert as well. And that one is going to have a tour of the night sky, from our Dark Sky site, or on our Dark Sky site. So sitting on a picnic rug on our viewing field, looking up at the Milky Way. A talk on Cassini space probe and I can never say it. Huygens spacecraft. That'll do. We're also going to have Alex Cherney, who's quite the astrophotographer, very, very well-known astrophotographer, amazing work. He's going to give some sessions on how to take a nightscape image using your phone or digital SLR. So it's all while sitting under the beauty of the night sky at our Dark Sky north of Heathcote. You'll be able to look through our 25 and 40 inch. You can camp on site. You can bring your caravan. As I said, it's $70 a person. Hopefully those tickets will be put up live tomorrow. Just waiting on one last finalization on that to do with food and drink, and then hopefully that'll go live tomorrow. So that's limited to 100 as well. So, and that's on the 14th of August, sort of starting at about 2 or 3 p.m. Get there before dark and enjoy hopefully a clear sky and the Milky Way above your head all night. Here we go. Robert has a question. What are some of the first objects you guys started your astrophotography journey with?
The moon.
The moon.
And then M42.
Yeah. Moon for me as well. I mean, it's the easiest thing to image. It's so big and bright, and then move to planets. But the first deep sky object I imaged was actually accidental. I hooked my DSLR onto my Dobsonian telescope, just took an image in the random patch of sky, and somehow I had the Tarantula Nebula in my field of view. And that was the moment that hooked me forever.
So for me, I don't do what these guys do. I don't have their fancy equipment. I use my phone. But the first object I saw through a telescope the first two objects were Saturn and the Jewel Box cluster, our deep sky section director's favorite. But they were the two things that sort of, I looked and I saw them and I went, wow. And that got me hooked on astronomy. And from there, it's grown. And now we get the team here get the honor, I guess. We get the honor of sharing our journey with you guys live. So it's I think what Caleb is doing right now is he's trying to find a galaxy for us to finish on. Bit of a bang, sort of a wow.
I don't think that will be much. What's this?
He's having a look.
Go back to that.
So there's a couple of comments in the private chat here. C83 Tweezers, Barnard's Galaxy, NGC 300. Some other options for you.
No, that's a cluster of galaxies.
That looks like Markarian's chain, is it not?
No, that's not.
No,
it's a Hercules galaxy.
That's Markarian's chain set.
So you can see this is the back of house, I guess. What you're looking at right now is the back of house of what astrophotographers, well, what Caleb does anyway. It shows him objects that are up and what he can and can't see, whether it's high enough for him to image, what angle it might be at, whether it's going to be close to meridian. So this gives him rising and setting times of each of these objects, and that means he can work out whether he can image them or not.
No, I can't do tweezers. It's too far south at the moment.
What about Centaurus A? Is that too low?
How far south can you go?
Deck 0. Because I'm shooting north, and everything south of Deck 0's house, unfortunately.
So, and sadly, most of the galaxies are not to the north at the moment.
Yeah, exactly, and they're very small. So I can't see anything.
Oh.
I was just having a quick look in Sky Safari, but I'm struggling to see very much. It's just over to the north is not. We're not sort of looking into galaxy territory to the north at the moment. It's more over to the west.
I might be able to swing over to M83. There's a very slight chance.
Give it a go. Let's try and see if we can finish with a bang.
All right, let me shut this down. Oh, not shut it down, but stop it so I can...
Look at this. You're getting to see the inner workings of an astrophotographer and how he goes about finding an object, seeing if it's visible, and then slewing across to it and trying to see if you can actually get an image of it. So while we're looking at that, Lee, will you be able to bring up M83 in Space Engine? Is that something we can do? Or
Yeah, I think so.
just to give them an idea of what we're going to be doing?
Just a sec. Oh, that was my Orion. Okay, yes.
Oh, there you go. You can look. If you look at the bottom right corner, you can see Caleb's telescope slewing around at the moment.
Yeah, just parking at the moment because there's a known glitch to the basis of a beta version of Nina. When I'm swinging from east to west, if I have to flip, it will actually just crash into the mount. So I have to park it and then move it. That happened earlier just then, so I'm kind of scared. That's why I have to park it first. And now it's going to M83.
I've got that there if you want to.
Let's jump in while we get an image. M83. So this is Space Engine's version.
That actually looks pretty accurate, I gotta say.
It does,
that's impressive.
doesn't it?
Yeah. So M83, as you're seeing before you, is a spiral galaxy. So it's not within our Milky Way galaxy. It's an entire separate collection of billions of stars way off in the distance. So M83 is around 14.7 million light years away. So when we pull up an image soon, the light that we'll see in that image will have left that galaxy 14.7 million years ago. So long before Homo sapiens even walked the Earth. So it's a smaller galaxy. It's around 50,000 light years in diameter. So about a half to a third the size of our own Milky Way. But in saying that, it's still a galaxy. It contains 40 billion stars. So 40 billion suns just like our own within that galaxy. Now, M83 is located in the constellation Hydra, or the Water Serpent, which is actually the largest constellation in terms of the area of the night sky that it covers. And it's what we call a southern hemisphere target. So this is a galaxy that's not easily observable for northern hemisphere folk. And you can tell that because it's called the Southern Pinwheel Galaxy. Now, of course, in the north, they've got their own Pinwheel Galaxy. So the M83, this Southern Pinwheel Galaxy, is actually one of the closest and brightest galaxies to our own Milky Way. And we've actually observed around 300 supernovae remnants within this galaxy. So just like the Vela supernova remnant that we were talking about before, we can see 300 supernovae remnants within that galaxy. And in fact, there have been 6 supernovae, so exploding stars, observed within this galaxy in the past 100 years, indicating to us that it's a really, really active galaxy. And we'll be able to show you that in some of the images that we bring up soon, because there are a lot of these sort of red starburst regions that you'll be able to see. So here you can see is an image taken of M83, the Southern Pinwheel. And again, if you're an astro imager, this is an absolute delight to image. You can see those obvious sort of spiral arms coming out from the center, and a bit of that sort of middle bar near the nucleus in the right in the core of the galaxy. And so it's a little hard to see the coloration in this image, but sort of those brownish reddish regions within the spiral arms, those are the starburst regions. So essentially the emission nebulae that we've shown you some of, those are the nebulae within that galaxy, the regions within that galaxy where new stars are rapidly being formed by compression of interstellar gas and dust, giving birth to new stars.
No luck with
No luck?
anything. No luck. I'm trying to find
Aw.
another alternative, but I don't think it will be happening.
That's all right. We gave it a shot.
Too far south.
Too far south.
Too
yeah.
far south, yeah.
No worries. All right. Well, I think that kind of brings us to the end of tonight's stream. So once again, thank you to everybody for coming along and joining us on our journey through the universe with that last little galaxy image, but prior to that, through the Milky Way. We hope you enjoyed it, and thank you to those who gave us stars. It's much appreciated. And I don't think we're going to be back next weekend, because if the Dark Sky side is open, we have our Deep Sky section on next Saturday night. But we do have some, it's planet season, so we do have some planet
Tuck
sessions.
season.
Yep, planet season.
Tuck season.
Yeah. Showing your age there, Lee. So we do have some planet streams lined up. A couple of our guys from Lunar and Planetary have picked out a couple of really good crossings of Jupiter with a couple of the moons that we might try and stream, as well as just when we get some nice clear skies, we'll try and focus a session just on Jupiter as well. So we do have some other streams lined up over the next sort of 3 or 4 weeks. And as soon as we've got them ready, we will share them with you. But as I mentioned, we've got our live viewing night at Melbourne Observatory on the 21st with tickets still available, and our live night, our in-person night at LMDSS north of Heathcote. And tickets, as I said, should be on sale tomorrow for that one, which is a bring your tent, bring your caravan, stay on site, stay the night up there basically. And join us for a wonderful night of observing. Fingers crossed that the skies are clear. It's been very cloudy lately. But thank you, everyone, for coming along, and we'll see you next time. See you later.
Thank you.
See you later.